So, welcome to Improve Your Mobile UI Design by Asking the Right Questions. Thanks for investing your time to be here. The reason I chose this topic is that we work in a very UI-intensive space. You're either writing an app for consumers, or your app is right next to some consumer-facing app that a team of UI experts wrote on. And we can't do anything about that. We're in a UI space. Almost all of us could use more experience, more training, more tools. Having a good UI design sense is very similar to me, why we need a good background in mathematics. You don't need a degree in math, but having higher math skills helps us be more effective. So, a little background before we get started. My name's Bill, and I'm a recovering development director. I started out as an architect back when they used pencils and paper. Hence my email. I've been an iOS developer now for 6 years, and I work remotely as a contract developer. So I don't consider myself a big-time UI expert, but I've always been interested in design. It's why I became an architect. It's what drew me to software development on the Mac and what pulled me back into iOS development. A couple of things to note about the career path on the screen. The vertical axis is personal fulfillment. The second thing to note is that if anybody ever tries to tell you that project management is the next logical career step for you, please don't fall for it. It cost me years of my personal career. A lot of speakers talk about their kids. My oldest son is an iOS development lead in San Francisco. And for those of you with young kids, you need to know that a day will come when one of your adorable little babies tells you that you're using Codable in the worst possible way. It's more likely in your case that they'll tell you, nobody's using Swift anymore. So, anyway, this is a quote from 1982 by Alan Kay. To paraphrase, we can improve our IQ by looking at problems from new perspectives. That's the genesis of this talk. Finding ways we can improve our mobile design IQ by asking questions that expand our perspective. So, we already do this with tools and technologies. When I started learning Swift, I got myself to use protocols by asking, should I use protocols instead of subclassing? Functional programming is the same way. You ask yourself if you can use maps instead of a for loop. Eventually, we internalize the concepts, and we no longer need the questions. So let's get started. I've grouped the questions into 10 different areas. Let's start with the user. As far as I'm concerned, the user is our only measure of success. So who are my users? It's an easy question most of us have asked, maybe even internalized, but we lose sight of it when projects get underway. Who uses the app? What's their level of technical ability? How motivated are they? If we've got an enterprise app with a captive audience, they may not be very motivated. So a related question is, how am I different from my users? Don't fool yourself, you are different. The question is by how much? I've worked in software domain areas like healthcare, where what's obvious intuitive to me was wrong for my users. I fell into the trap that I thought I knew more about what was intuitive and obvious than they did. You need to ask a lot of questions and keep your mind open. It occurred to me this morning that I should have added another question to this talk called, do I respect the users? Because a lot of times I started out early in my career thinking that I was smarter than them, and you do need to respect users. Familiarity with the app, you're going to win no contest. Your users are never going to know as much as you do about the app. And as a technical user, we're all in the extreme minority. We need to keep that in mind. So, the second area is comprehension. For users to comprehend what they see, it's up to us to communicate the identity of everything on the screen. So, the dictionary definition of identity is brief and to the point. It's who or what a thing is. We can use explicit cues to indicate identity, like labels, or implicit cues like positioning or formatting. It's up to us to use those cues together to provide consistent messages about the identity of everything on the screen. So a fairly mundane question is, do the labels and naming reinforce identity? This is an example of a list of bus schedules. The user is selecting a route, but the items are named schedules. That should be route 11 and route 13, not schedule. It's a simple task to look at your labels and make sure they correctly identify their target. So, another question is, do icons provide identity and meaning? We can get lazy with icons and use them decoratively, especially in a tab bar where they have a secondary label. These are some tab bars from popular apps where the label's hidden. Let's just go down from the top to bottom. I'm not sure, can you identify the last two icons in Yahoo Sports? I could not. In Walmart Grocery, can you guess the Foursquare icon in the middle? We all use the music app, so those might be a little easier. Even after I created this presentation, I don't think I could probably do all of Office Maps. They've even replaced the canonical home icon with a little drawing of their store. And Kroger is a grocery store chain. Now I get that with labeled icons, the label is the authority. And users are expected to associate the icon with the label. But anything on the screen that's not pulling its weight is a wasted opportunity to communicate with the user. Here's one of my favorites. What can be removed without reducing comprehension? Is there anything that isn't contributing to the identity of the elements on the screen? It's just like redundant code comments. Anything that's not adding value is taking up space. So this is the Amtrak account screen. Do a quick inventory. How many items do you see that you think could be removed? To give you, what's that? Yep, well, so now that you've made that little mental list, let's look at it. There's 8 items on the screen that are completely unnecessary. And if you take them out and you remove the white space, you end up with a better screen. So, makes me want to review my code and remove some code comments. But, so the inverse of that question is clarity being sacrificed for simplicity. This is the Kindle app for iPad. The first time I saw the screen, I kind of dismissed it as sort of a protest because the icons they're just lines. Now, I get it. The user can experiment and figure out what's going on, but most apps don't have that luxury. And clarity is the goal, not simplicity. Do repeating elements have a consistent identity? We scan repeating elements, like elements in a list, looking for a piece of information. The expectation, because of its position in a column, is that the type and format's identical, and identity is implied. You might have already noticed that the first item in the left column is different than the rest. It's the same type of data. It's the time till the bus arrives, but it's formatted differently. I showed it to 4 people spontaneously, and 3 of them misread it. It's easy to misread and easy to figure out. It shifts from minutes and seconds to hours and minutes. I'm sure there's other solutions to this problem, but one, I converted the column to minutes in the mock-up and only included seconds in the first one, which differentiates it. So let's talk about purpose. What's the purpose of a screen? This is kind of an existential question, but if we're going to look at ways to improve a screen and judge how well it serves its function, you have to understand its reason for being, or raison d'etre, as the French say. This is an app called Around Me. It's designed to make you aware of amenities in your area. The initial screen's a list of categories. Second screen displays items in a category when you tap on a category. The third one displays detail for the item you selected. They're fairly unambiguous. Each has its own reason. And once you understand the purpose, you have a starting point for making judgments about how it can be improved. This is an app called All Trails. It provides information about hiking trails near you. The purpose of that Explore screen in the center of the screen is to select a trail from the list. Now, knowing that, you could ask reasonably good questions like, why are the trail names cut off? The trail names are that this particular one's cut off instead of wrapping. The trail picture looks great, but does it add value? Because it has drawbacks. It makes the cell height higher. It makes the text, the text can be more difficult to read, especially the smaller text. It's a successful app with a nice user interface, but if, in the context of its purpose, you can ask intelligent questions about how to improve it. A special case of purpose is the home screen, the first screen in the app, the one you land in. The new user opens your app, they're trying to figure out what the hell does this thing do? It's your first impression. And both of these apps communicate what they do in their default state, no context or user login. A lot do, but a lot don't. It's a good thing to ask yourself. So, we need to be on the same page with the user on where they focus their attention. As users, we're always screening what we see, looking for the highest value information. Okay? In order to take advantage of that, we need to think about the elements that are the primary focus of attention on the screen and whether they align with the priorities of the user. So, is information visually prioritized? Sensor Push is an app that displays data from HomeKit devices. In this case, it's showing a week's data from a remote temperature and humidity sensor in the house. There's a lot of data being displayed, but it's up to the user to parse it all and figure out what's relevant. If you give visual priority to the min-max and average temperatures and humidity values, the user is much more able to look at and scan the data. The chart data isn't, in that case, it isn't de-emphasized. We don't take anything away from the chart data. It's just, it now has a context for you to interpret it in. So. Sometimes you need to ask whether the visual priority matches the user's priority. All three of these apps have typical landing pages that prioritize ads, banner, and eye candy. It's a very typical thing. I'm sure marketing has made somebody in this room do something like this. But from my perspective, the visual priority of the elements on the screen doesn't match the user's priority. The burden is on them to figure out what they're going to do and where they have to go. So are repeating elements scannable? Lists exist so the user can compare items or select an item from the list. To optimize scanning a list, critical information needs to be visually prominent so it's scannable. A lot of apps do this. There's the Southwest flight results. Gas Buddy displays a list of repeating elements showing local gas stations and fuel price. The screen is kind of complex and it has multiple sections and filtering options, but the critical information stands out so that you can scan it. This one's simple, but it has a big impact. Do graphics and layout support scanning? This is the department selection screen for the Walmart grocery app. It has one job, and that's to let the user scan the list of departments and pick one. But the graphics aren't aligned. My eye jumps back and forth. There's a reason that the graphic elements are typically on the left in a left-to-right language. I'm sure my guess is they did it because they didn't have the graphics is optional and they didn't want it to be blank, but it's Walmart, guys. You guys can. It took me about 3 minutes to find that graphic on the web. It's not rocket science. State is important in mobile. The user needs to know what's selected, what the context is, what's determining what they see. So this is, the question here is the state clear? This is the home screen for around me we looked at before. There's no state except for your location, which is the purpose of the app. And in the second screen, you select a category. It shows you movies that are close to you, the states shown in the title. In the third screen, when you select a movie, it continues to represent the state. So, back buttons also reinforce state. They show where you came from, and they align the navigation with the state. Now, similar to Around Me, when you open Transit Tracker, this is an app that shows you different public transportation in different cities around the country. The context is your location. The name of the metro area of Chicago is in the title of the screen up there. The state's pretty clear. But if you open the left slide-out menu, shown on the far right, you realize that it's showing bus routes and that there are other transit types that it can display. Once you start using the app, you can recognize the transit type because you have to choose it, but it would be they could improve this by just putting bus routes Chicago and make the state clear. Interaction time is another key issue in mobile design. It's all about being efficient with the user's time. This is another definition I like, achieving maximum productivity with minimum wasted effort. It's like a mobile design motto that we should all be following. This is, if you ask the question, can interaction time be reduced? You can get good insights. This is the Cam Scanner app. It's for scanning a document. There's a three-step process. You tap the camera button in the home screen. In the second step, you focus on the document, take the picture. Third step, you review the picture and confirm the boundaries. It's a simple and direct process. This is Microsoft Office Lens. It's another app for scanning documents. This is the home screen. There is no step 2 or 3. The user adjusts the document in the window until it detects the frame, and alignment's part of that process. Now, there are benefits to the Cam Scanner approach, but Office Lens has chosen to optimize for interaction time. Navigation is how the user accesses all the functionality of your app. If the navigation is unclear, the user won't have a clear picture of the functionality of your app. So, apps don't have sitemaps except in the user's head. So a relevant question is the sitemap memorable? This is the Amtrak app again. It has a home page with 3 different types of navigation. The header button up for the guest rewards. Each trip in the trip list, this is a trip I took earlier this year. Each trip in the trip list has its own navigation. There's 3 navigation items there. In the tab bar, there's global navigation at the bottom. It's straightforward, except there's the 3 buttons for the trip. One links to the detail screen on the left. You can see one links to a popover with a QR code on the right, the screen you see on the right. In the middle, a QR code, the right-hand trip tools links to an action sheet that has a global action mixed in with the trip-specific actions. All the 3 screens have data that are overlaps, so it's very difficult to figure out and remember where things are. I still have problems I use all the time. If the nav options aren't clear and the functionality is not well differentiated, the user has an incomplete mental model of your app. Navigation options need to be recognizable. The horizontal scrolling menus have migrated from the web. I'm not a big fan because it obscures navigation options. This is a regional grocery chain, and there's 7 categories that you can only see 2 of them in the horizontal scrolling menu. Navigation needs to be consistent and predictable. The UPS app is a fairly good example of standard mobile navigation. It has a primary navigation at the tab bar at the bottom, which is the tracking options that are the main function of the app. The secondary navigation in the upper left is the utilities. I believe there's a log-in, log-out settings there. New Jersey Transit app landing page is not a thing of beauty, but it has fairly clear navigation. You can see that there's 5 things in a block up there. There's 2 more down below. The navigation options are straightforward. But if you tap the nav icon in the upper left, consistency starts to break down. The slide-out menu duplicates much of the home screen nav. It has different groupings with some new things mixed in. The 3 unlabeled icons at the top row are global navigations, the home settings, and logout. Predictability breaks down more when you navigate to one of the content screens like the one on the right. The back button in the lower left appears in some screens and not others. So in-place navigation. One way to ensure the user understands your app navigation is to simplify it. This is the history screen for the mobile meter parking app. You tap on the item and it shows the history in place. It shows the detail for that history in place. It simplifies navigation by eliminating a navigation step. There's no branch of the sitemap to remember. So, as mobile developers, we're in no position to make demands. This pretty much sums up our relationship with the user. The user's that popular, attractive, successful person that's way out of our league. We need to do whatever we can to keep them happy. So, how do we keep our users happy? Well, can we minimize typing? This is the Passport parking app. Starting with the process of selecting parking space and pay for it. You can identify the parking zone by picking a previously used one. You can select a space or type in a number if you're trying to find your space. And then to select a time slot, you drag right or left on a custom control that displays both the time you selected and the window that ends for paid parking. You can, I find it surprising, you can actually select a parking space without ever typing. So it's another way to keep users happy is how do we simplify data entry? This is mobile meter we looked at previously. It's a payment detail screen. They auto-insert hyphens in the credit card number so that it's easier to read and confirm the number that you're typing. They autofill the payment, the user-defined payment name so that that feature doesn't incur data cost. Apps like Amazon let you use the camera to enter your credit card. Anything to reduce the amount of data entry the user has to do. Another question related to reducing the burden on users is, are we interpreting data? Are we providing raw data and leaving them to interpret it? Or are we doing some interpretation for them? Just about all weather apps heavily interpret data for the user. There's an enormous amount of data. And they simplify it to images, graphics. There are summaries on both. It's very typical for there to be a summary of what's coming for the next hour. Otherwise, the user would have to go through all that data to figure out what they want to know. Even in less graphically oriented apps, we can interpret data for the user, especially dates and times. When you look at a range of sensor readings and sensor push, the date time sensor always ends at the current time. The simplest rendition of that would be, I would do today. If you leave in the screen, the time, you can get 3 or 4 or 5 minutes away from the time. That's really inconsequential. The user doesn't care. They just need to know that it's today or now. Is there a learning curve to use the app? This is a popular to-do list app on the App Store named Clear. I installed it a couple of years ago. So it had a single empty grocery list. Basically, you swipe up and down to figure out how to use it. This is a video I took when I tried to reacquaint myself with the app. If you're having trouble following what the app was doing, I did too when I was using it. If you look at tips and tricks, it lists 14 different gestures to learn how to use the app. 4 are common, like swipe to delete, and 10 are specific to the app. I get the feeling that if I would apply myself for 5 or 10 minutes, I could use it, but this is a steeper learning curve than I'm willing to climb. In contrast, this is the initial screen of a to-do list named Spend Stack. It's designed for a list of items that each have associated cost. The screen is just as simple. You tap the plus in the bottom, though, and you start making a list, create a list, Screen's blank, but you're in the list. You tap on the plus. It's nearly as simple as the previous example, but it's designed to allow user an easy on-ramp. As far as I can tell, there aren't any actions or gestures you need to learn to use that. So it's easy for developer testing to become an opportunity to admire our UI. We really like what we did, but we need to boundary test cases to break our user interfaces. This is my actual Verizon Smart Family screen. When your 5 youngest kids' names all begin with E, you have to randomly tap on E's to figure out who's who. Expanding to using 2 initials, I gotta tell you, doesn't help either. The other traps that are easier to fall into are using short names instead of extremely long, or hyphenated names, using data that's tailored to show off that you like your layout. You want it to look good. But the fact is, we should test boundary cases to break our code, and we should test boundary cases to break our UI. So I originally titled this section, When Bad Interfaces Happen to Good People. Sometimes we work on mobile UIs with legacy UI issues. How do we deal with that? So a good start is to ask the question, what are the root issues? And this is the device screen of an app named Master Fader. It's for mixing live audio. It doesn't follow any conventions. It uses screen poorly. It has tiny text. The first thing to do is inventory the issues you see and break them down to visual versus functional. And once you've identified issues, you can prioritize the issues that have potential for improvement and decide what's the most impactful. Visual issues demand my attention, but it's the functional issues that I've been able to use to justify rework. So in this particular case, if you proposed addressing the functional issue of unreadable text, you probably would move to a vertically scrolling list and have an opportunity to address all those issues. The key question to ask before you start to analyze or prioritize is there buy-in to address issues? This one is personal. It's an app I worked on that's no longer in the App Store. It presents a list of practice tests that the user created to prepare for an exam, a medical board exam. Being young and naive, about 5 years ago, I spent an evening mocking up an alternative UI, but I didn't get buy-in before making the changes. So without buy-in, it was a lost cause. The mock-up is lovely. It adds new functionality like tapping. You can tap on those little circles, and this drops down. It gives you more detail. But in hindsight, I had 0 buy-in, and it was a fail. So at least I got a conference slide out of it. So let's end by talking about the beginning. This was my development process once upon a time, probably yours. It still has its place, but since most projects have limited resources, we can ask questions as a way to help us make the most of those resources. The first one is, why is the idea unique? Are you going to build just any calculator? There's literally 100 calculators in the App Store. What makes yours special? So what if you were to write a calculator where you could write equations long? It wouldn't need any tiny keys. It wouldn't need all those functions. So write down why it's unique. The second one is, what assumptions am I making? Right? List as many assumptions as you can think of. And the third one related to vision is, how would it work? You probably have some sketches or some idea of what makes the idea unique. So you've answered these basic questions, so move on to users. Who are your users? Who would use this app? Specifically, now, everybody would use my app. Everybody would write equations, not everybody. I wouldn't get out a stylus or use my finger to write equations, but these people would probably keep it something close by to do it. What do they need? They need the function of the scientific calculator. They need stylus support. They need larger screens. And from that, probably what drops out is you need to support tablets. You can't just support phones. So we cover vision and users. Now, what about context? So it's used in the classroom and office, typically at a desk. I think I probably shouldn't limit to the U.S. I should make it support folks outside the U.S. What are their needs? We're going to have to support multiple currency and number formats. This is a good place to, if you have to decide whether you're going to support. If you need connectivity to do what you're going to do, what are you going to do in offline mode? So. And lastly, the implementation, in this case, it's localization. You can think about platforms. You're going to support Android. What are you going to do about those issues? So before you decide to implement this idea, it's already on the App Store somewhere. So now that you have notes on vision, users, and context for your ideas, what do you do with them? It obviously helps clarify your vision and contain scope while you develop. Once you start getting feedback, you can know what feedback to act on and what to ignore. And you may come up with questions you don't know the answers to. For extra credit, you can ask some potential users. Find some people who would actually use it and ask them what they need. So that wraps up the questions. I just wanted to close with one last thought, and that is, it's been fairly easy to look at other developers' apps from an objective point of view. It's like a code review. You have some perspective that the author doesn't, or probably doesn't have. The trick is to apply these questions to the apps that you're much closer to, the apps that you work on every day. So, hope these 37 questions can help. Thank you for listening. Questions or anything to wrap up? Yeah, Tom.
How did you find the app?
How did I what?
How did you discover these ugly apps? Were you using them, or did you look?
Some of them I actually use, like Amtrak. I do, and some of them sensor push I actually use because it actually gives me HomeKit data. It was. I had to be circumspect though. I'm trying to look at this as a code review, right? You're trying to look at ways people can improve. You're not trying to dump shit on people. So it was. It's not easy. I had to ask some people for some help. It's like, do you know of an app that does that? So, and I tried to mix in obviously positive and negative. So, we've got a few minutes here. I had kind of a. Did somebody back there have a question? Yeah.
I was wondering from a project management perspective, if you have a tool you like for keeping track of these answers over time as a project developer.
You know, the question is, and I'm sorry to repeat Tom's, is there a project management tool to keep track of these answers? I've not ever been in an organization that had that kind of tracking. Obviously, if you raise issues, you could put them into whatever bug system you can and try to get that's a good way to raise it up to the organization and try to get exposure. I find the hardest ones are the ones that I'm working on. One potential thing we could do in the remaining 10 minutes, I thought I would bare my soul and say, okay, I got these questions. How does some app that I have worked on, or I dug up a prototype from about 2 or 3 years ago. How can we improve that app by applying some of these questions? I don't know if you want to do that or you guys are ready to bail. You want to do that? Okay. While I find it, it is an app. It's a prototype of an app. It's a prototype for an app for families with disabilities, families who have kids with disabilities, to find resources around them. So it needs to be able to show, I thought I was mirror display. Make sure I got it. It's an app, it's just a prototype, there's no data. Let's close all this other crap behind it, but we won't bother about that. So the goal is that someone who has someone with autism or spina bifida to, if their kid's newly diagnosed, or if they have a kid with a cat that just was injured in an accident and is disabled for some reason. How can they get access to resources that are either local, regional, or national? So I prototyped this app. The first thing that I noticed when I looked at this is that some of my labels, now it's great that an icon has a label and a sub-label. It's like really cool. But some of my labels and some of those icons, this is really about services, not organizations. It needs to have you do search for organizations. You end up, when you look for services, you end up with Easter seals, or you end up with your local hospital. But it's about the service, not the organization. So there's some labeling issue there. My icons are pulled straight from, just graphics, images off the web, icon sets. So there's some icons that get class embedders. In specifically, profile should be a person. It's your profile. It probably should be your. So, and please feel free to chime in if you guys see anything, because since I did this, I'm closer to it than you are. So, one of the areas I prototyped was events. You tap on events, and it shows you events. As you can see there, I tried to show state. I could probably improve how it's rendered. But what I did is this is a filter. It needs a filtering icon. The icon it probably doesn't represent filtering very well. What's that? Correct. Exactly. Very good. And in fact, in my prototype, it's moved around. It's moved around. Sometimes it was up, and sometimes it was down. One of the patterns I am using is if you tap on, I'm going to tap on this top item. That actually it gives you detail on the item, and then you can actually see more. So there's some good things going on there. If you tap on another one, it expands, shows the other items. But it's not really very scannable. I could benefit from taking my own advice about scannability. So, other notes? Yeah. Which the navigation bar? This one, the banner. Yeah. Sure. Right. A little louder, I'm sorry. Sure. Exactly. No, and in fact, that's certainly one of the main issues for me is the user isn't the disabled person. However, if you don't support accessibility, your credibility just gets shot. So the fact that this is a prototype, in my defense, it's a prototype, and we haven't gotten it yet. Sure. Yep. Right. Excellent point. So and to show you how rough the prototype is, if you actually do the filtering window is completely rough, but the goal was to be able to tap easily and add information pretty quickly, and that banner now changes and shows you the context is different. It is still a prototype. The actual contents of the list hasn't changed. So, yeah.
One of your questions is interaction time. So
yeah.
After you set up things, does the interaction time make sense for the most commonly used?
Sure. And the question is, if you didn't hear it, is the interaction time optimized, really, right? I mean, is that for the most common? Sure. And that's an excellent question. And my goal here, since since I was prototyping it, I was looking at making it fairly straightforward, easy to change. All the list items are based on enumerated types, so I could reorder things based on people's priorities and what the best thing, the things that they use the most. So good point. So, and that's really all the prototype does. None of these other things actually work. But it's a good exercise to apply these to your own work. So I figured I should eat my own dog food. So questions? Wrap up? I really appreciate the fact that you guys dedicated the time to be here. This is great, so thank you very much.